Before I leave Copenhagen and the subject of the bow, I wanted to make one last installment which has to do with making a case for using a tighter bow rather than a looser bow. And I'm going to do this in three parts, in three different ways, because each of them is unique and each of them is very, very important, I think, for good bow technique. The first thing I'm going to do, because you see the sound level meter to your right there, is I'm going to demonstrate how I'm able to get a louder sound with a tighter bow. And so first I'm going to play with the loose bow, one note, and I'm going to count 8 beats, and I'm going to use the same amount of bow consistently throughout, but I'm going to make crescendo to the frog. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I'll do it again. Watch the meter. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now I'm going to tighten the bow and do the same thing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I'll do it one more time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The point is, with more bow tension, you're simply able to put more force into the string. And putting more force into the string will enable you to get closer to the bridge and produce a louder sound. Now, the second object of tightening the bow more is that it grabs and engages the string more immediately than a looser bow. And in order to illustrate that, I'm going to take you into the bathroom. Now imagine that the door handle, see there in front of you, is the string. And this is the thing that has to be moved and pushed by the bow in order to engage it. And the bow hair is, of course, it's loose and flexible like the stem of this flower. So, let's say I'm putting the bow hair onto the string, and when I begin to pull, eventually the door moves, but not until the bow hair flexes. So there's a time lag between when I start to put pressure, which is now, and when the door actually moves. So if I were to take something stiffer, like for example this pen, and put it there, as soon as I start to pull, which is now, the door moves immediately. Of course, the bow hair will never be as stiff as a pen, but it can be stiffer if you tighten it a little more. And now, that immediacy of response is something that I would like to just go over with the cello, because you can also hear that to a certain extent, even on this little camera. If I am to play with consistency, say on the D string, which is a little more difficult to make speak, I will get a more consistent sound if I tighten the bow, as opposed to, you hear how every other note or so is kind of barking. Well, that's what we don't want, and that's how a tighter bow tension can get you a cleaner sound. Now, the other aspect, the last aspect to tighten the bow more, is a little more complicated, and I'll try to explain it as clearly as I can. By tightening the bow, you make, of course, the middle of the strings of the bow hairs stiffer. Remember, we talked about the middle as being the weak point in the bow, and that the ends of the bow, here, because it's closer to the tip and closer to the frog, are more stable. Well, what happens when you tighten the bow more is that the good playing qualities of this area of the bow and this area of the bow are actually widened towards the middle. In other words, the middle becomes more like the tip and more like the frog. And here I'll give you very good, very easy examples of that. You remember when we were talking about the 1/4 way out, and I was doing that stroke? Well, let me show you something. If I loosen the bow, try to do that towards the middle, it's impossible because it bounces too much. But if I tighten the bow more, a little more, it sounds a little better. If I tighten it even more, it becomes possible to do the stroke which previously I had only been able to do here in the middle of the bow. Also, you'll notice that if I want to play with this kind of consistency in the middle of the bow, if the bow is loose, I can't get that consistency of sound. But if I tighten the bow, it becomes in the middle more like at the tip. Remember how I was talking about 3/4 of the way out is comfortable for these bow strokes that cross strings? Well, if I tighten the bow more, this becomes possible there, whereas if the bow is loose, it just doesn't work so well. So by tightening the bow more, and by tightening more, I mean the differences that I was just doing was about this for loose as opposed to pretty tight. This. Not straight, but getting close to straight. If I tighten it that much, the differences in the playing quality of the bow are considerable. I have to say that far too often I encounter young musicians in coachings and in lessons that are using the bow at a much looser degree of tension than I could ever manage to play a concert. So I would advise tightening up your bow, bringing it not to straight, but closer to straight than maybe you ever have. And I think you'll discover that a lot more is possible, and you'll sound better. You'll be able to do more in all places of the bow. And I hope that works out. And I'll see you back in America.